Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Constructing Legends with the Violet Howler, a literary analysis of Voltron Legendary Defender. For today's episode, I want to talk about one of the methods that the show uses to foreshadow future plot developments. If you've watched my Kingdom Hearts videos, then you've already heard me talk about the concept of microcosm to macrocosm storytelling. But I want to do an episode about how this type of writing is used in Voltron Legendary Defender before I get any further with my analysis of the show, for two reasons. First, I want to give newcomers to my channel an explanation of the concept without making it a prerequisite to watch all of my Kingdom Hearts videos. And second, to illustrate how the show's use of microcosm to macrocosm foreshadowing helps to clue viewers into where plot lines were cut out of Season 8 as a result of the executive meddling that I discussed in my first Voltron video. So without further ado, let's dive in and discuss how microcosm to macrocosm foreshadowing is employed in Voltron Legendary Defender, and how the lack of payoff in the final season can be used to identify areas where the story has been steered away from what the writers planned.
The wise stand back from the fire. Fools are burned on the pyre. The mystic becomes one with the flame. The embers and he are the same.
As I've talked about in my Constructing Kingdoms video series, the term microcosm to macrocosm refers to a concept from ancient Greek philosophy which argues that a part of something, the microcosm, is a mirror of the whole, the macrocosm. While never official, I had seen the term used informally in literary discussions to describe how scenarios in early chapters or episodes of a story are repeated in later ones with higher stakes and a larger impact on the overall narrative. One of my go-to examples is how the first 5 seasons of Star Wars The Clone Wars featured multiple instances of Ahsoka Tano being hunted by clone troopers to foreshadow the circumstances she'll be dealing with when the Jedi Purge begins in the show's final episodes. And as I've repeatedly talked about in my Constructing Kingdoms videos, every Kingdom Hearts game uses parallels to its Disney worlds to foreshadow the events of each game's plot. With Voltron Legendary Defender, the most obvious example of the show's use of microcosm to macrocosm foreshadowing is one that most of the audience is likely to be familiar with. It's been common knowledge almost since the day that Season 6 released on Netflix that the events of the season's third episode, Monsters and Mana, foreshadow the events that take place over the remainder of the season. In Monsters and Mana, we see the Paladins play a role-playing game where their characters are on a quest to save one player's hometown, whose inhabitants have been turned to stone by an evil wizard. Which mirrors the discovery in the following episode that Lotor has allegedly been harvesting the last survivors of Allura's people for their quintessence. The heroes are given directions to the wizard's lair by a helpful innkeeper, who later reveals himself to be the wizard in disguise, using them to collect crystals as part of his evil plan. Much like how the Paladins believe Lotor was just using them to further his own goals after learning of his alleged villainy. Then, after being defeated in his first form, the wizard turns into an enormous humanoid dragon, whom the heroes defeat by setting on fire until he explodes. And after battling the heroes with his individual syncline ships, Lotor combines them all into his own giant mecha with a reptilian-looking tail, and is then defeated when hit with a massive blast of quintessence that overloads his systems. After the game is concluded, Karan as the Dungeon Master teases a new campaign which would reveal that the evil wizard was ultimately just a pawn of an even greater threat. Then after Lotor's defeat, his mother Unnerva goes on to become the main threat of the remaining seasons as she lashes out to destroy Voltron and their allies as revenge for her son, while she tries to rebuild the family she never got to have. And over the course of the game, Shiro's character dies multiple times and comes back as a new player character that is functionally the same person. Which mirrors how subsequent episodes reveal that Shiro died off-screen at the end of Season 2, and the version of him that came back in Season 3 was a clone with all his memories and personality. And after his clone died, Shiro is resurrected in the clone body, but having both sets of memories according to the showrunners, and therefore functionally being one character. But the fact that the wizard only turned the village to stone, which the other player characters treated as reversible, and the teases of a greater threat at the end, hint at there being more to the story of the Altean colony than what we were initially given in Season 6. And what a lot of viewers don't realize is that Monsters and Mana was not the first episode to feature a microcosm parallel of that same storyline. The plot of Season 2, Episode 2, The Depths, features a very blatant parallel to the events of Season 6 and beyond. In the depths, Lance and Hunk pass through a corrupted wormhole and stumble upon a hidden settlement underneath the frozen surface of an ocean planet inhabited by mermaids which they had previously believed did not exist. Meanwhile, Keith and his mother Crowlea pass through the Quantum Abyss in Season 6, Episode 2, Razor's Edge, and stumble upon a hidden settlement located under a dome inhabited by surviving Alteans, who our heroes had previously believed did not exist anymore. Both parties encounter a single female individual who leads them from the outskirts back to her civilization, and establishes that this hidden society worships a royal figure who the audience is primed to be suspicious of. In the depths, it's Queen Luxia, revered by her people as all-knowing while ominously repeating how safe and warm everyone in her domain is. And in Season 6, it's Lotor, hailed as a savior by the surviving Alteans, while audiences have been suspicious of his motives ever since his introduction based on his actions toward the heroes in Season 3 and the history of the franchise in general. Both rulers are revealed to periodically send individuals to a secondary location from which they never return, with the Queen sending mermaids to take a swim in the Baku Garden, and Lotor having select Alteans brought to a second colony. The Depths features a trio of mermaid rebels who reveal to Lance that all of the other mermaids are being mind-controlled, and they alone have managed to avoid being swayed, which parallels how Romel's introduction in Season 6 and the behavior of the other Alteans in Season 8 frames her as the only Altean in the colony who didn't buy into the hero worship of Lotor. And she relays to Keith how her brother's death and last words, followed by Lotor's subsequent order to cover it up, made her aware that something about what was going on at the second colony was being deliberately hidden from the rest of her people. The mermaids turn out to be correct about what was happening, but their speculation about the who, the why, and the how turn out to be wrong. Because after being defeated and captured, Queen Luxia is revealed to have been mind-controlled herself, and the real threat, a giant sea worm whose hair was the source of the mind control, rises up from its resting place to attack the heroes for threatening its food source. Meanwhile, Romel admits in her flashbacks that she only knew part of the truth, and when the Paladins accuse Lotor of being a murderer and a monster like his father, Lotor insists that they have no idea what they're talking about. Then after Lotor is defeated, his mother emerges as the main threat to the universe and attacks the heroes for abandoning her son. And both the Depths and the Colony feature a Paladin being mind-controlled into attacking and attempting to subdue at least one of his teammates. We can tell the parallels between the mermaids and the Alteans are intentional because of the blatant visual similarities between the designs of key characters in both scenarios. Florona's color scheme is red, green, yellow, and white, just like the colors of Bandor's hair and clothing. The Rebel Mermaid Plaxum's design uses the colors blue, pink, white, and yellow just like Romel's, and Plaxum has two pigtail-like protrusions on her head in the same general shape as Romel's hairstyle. And the symbol on Queen Luxia's forehead looks almost identical to the symbol on top of Lotor's flagship. Meanwhile, Luxia's two main guards wear helmets that give them silhouettes which are incredibly similar to those of the Galra scientists who accompany Lotor in Romel's flashbacks to evaluate which Alteans are fit to go to the second colony. And the Merguards also wear white armor plates on their hips in the same size, shape, and location as the pockets of the Galra scientists' uniforms. Even Hunk briefly gets in on these visual parallels, with the lighting of the scene where he fights Lance while mind-controlled giving him a highlight across his nose that looks very similar to Shiro's signature facial scar. But it's not just the Altean colony storyline being foreshadowed through microcosm parallels. Season 1 features Allura using her magical abilities to heal a Balmera from the brink of death by channeling her quintessence into it so that it won't die and take everyone on its surface out with it. Which mirrors how the final season gives us several Alteans channeling their quintessence into a whole group of Balmera to keep Unurva's rift in the fabric of reality from expanding and destroying their entire universe or collapsing and leaving the heroes stranded, and also how Allura uses her magical abilities to restore the entire multiverse after Unurva has destroyed all realities except one. Season 5 has Crowlea release an augmented monster on their enemies in order to save her son's life, which then becomes a threat to both Voltron and their allies because of its inability to distinguish friend from foe. Then Lotor's mother frees him from the rift in Season 8 in order to save him, only for him to lash out at both their allies and enemies alike in a berserker rage, unable to distinguish friend from foe. On top of all this, even the official tie-in comics, written by story editor Tim Hedrick and writer Mitch Iverson, provide microcosm parallels to scenarios that happen later in the show. In the first volume of the comics, released between July and November 2016 and taking place during Season 1, the Paladins search for a princess who can give them answers to the location of a Alexian Pearl. When they find the princess, she appears to be held captive by an angry dragon, only for them to find out that the princess is the dragon, and the person they thought was the princess is actually an evil witch using magic to keep the princess trapped in her monstrous form. This brings to mind how Season 8, Episode 10, Knights of Light Part 2, establishes through a glimpse of his melted body that Lotor has been physically fused with his syncline mech, thereby literally trapping him in its draconic form. Meanwhile, his mother Onerva, also known as the Witch Hagar, quickly demonstrates the ability to use her powers to control him, forcing him to obey her commands. In addition to that, the princess in the comics tells the Paladins that the witch's actions prevented her from telling anyone what was really going on, which parallels how Seasons 3, 4, and 5 demonstrated that Hagar has a history of spying on Lotor that has made him justifiably paranoid about the security of his operations, to the point of keeping large portions of his plans a secret from even his own allies. And in the second volume of the comics, released between October 4th and December 13th of 2017 and taking place midway through Season 2, the Paladins travel through a dangerous area of space known as the Wastes to reach the sacred hunting grounds of the Dovdabao people. This serves as a microcosm of the final episode of Season 5, White Lion, released in 2018, which features the Paladins traveling through a dangerous area of space known as the Petrulian Zone, a graveyard of wrecked spaceships, in order to reach Oriond, a mystical realm considered sacred to the Alteans. Both sacred lands are protected by an animal-themed guardian entity that can change its size to be proportional with that of its opponent. And both guardians challenge a half-Galra to prove his worthiness by attacking him, with each guardian's respective opponent getting a close-up shot as he desperately tries to keep the guardian's jaws away from his face. Thanks to the executive meddling of Season 8 that I discussed in my first video, the version of the final season that we got in December 2018 failed to close off the remaining threads of the microcosm parallels that were set up by prior seasons and comics. But even then, the edited version of Season 8 still contained several details and even new parallels that indicated that this missing macrocosm payoff had been animated and voice acted in full and then cut out after the fact, leaving the clips left over to be shuffled around in order to paper over the gaps this editing created in the narrative. Season 8, Episode 11, Uncharted Regions, opens with Onerva telling Merla that the Paladins now know of their plans, and when Merla asks if this is a problem, Onerva responds that it's an advantage, which, as I mentioned in my previous video, calls back to the ending of Season 3, Episode 3, The Hunted, where Aksha reacts to the new Paladin roster demonstrating the ability to form Voltron for the first time by asking Lotor if this will be a problem, and he responds that it's an opportunity. After which Lotor proceeds to use the team's compassion and Allura's attachment to her people to trick the team into recovering the comet he needs to create his own giant mecha because he doesn't have the tools to do it himself. This frames Onerva's plans immediately after pulling Lotor out of the rift as a macrocosm to Lotor's actions in Season 3, indicating that Onerva needs the Paladins to accomplish something that she doesn't have the ability to do on her own. And later in the episode, when Allura wakes up after the team's escape from inside Onerva's mind, we cut to Onerva inside her flagship, dramatically announcing that the princess is awake, which implies that it's Allura specifically that she needs for her plans rather than the Paladins as a group. And one of the magical abilities that Allura has consistently demonstrated throughout the series that Onerva never did, even after brute forcing her way through the trials of Oriond, is the ability to heal living beings that are on the brink of death and restore them to full health. From the Balmera in Season 1 to Lance and Shiro in Season 6, and even to the dead tree on Earth, whose branches I pointed out in my previous video bear a notable resemblance to the melted bits of Lotor's body keeping him tethered to the cockpit chair of his robot. Whereas the most healing that we've ever seen Onerva accomplish was waking Zarkon up from his coma at the end of Season 3 so that he could get into a proper life support suit. In the Season 8 we got, Lotor is passed off as having died off screen once his mother popped the lid off his giant robot, and nothing about her plan to escape to another reality where she could start over with alternate universe versions of her dead husband and son required anything from Voltron or Allura that she couldn't obtain herself. But in the context of the microcosm parallels from Season 2 and the comics, Onerva would have used Allura to heal Lotor and free him from his metaphorical draconic curse. And when Allura absorbs the Rift Entity at the end of Season 8, Episode 8, Clear Day, she sees a vision of Lotor telling her to follow him, followed by an image of Voltron hovering in front of the Altean colony planet and its moons before the screen fades to white. Then the next episode establishes that she spent 2 days unconscious and woke up knowing exactly how to use the Rift Entity to enter Onnerva's mind, implying that she spent those 2 days unconscious doing the same thing with Lotor, thereby giving him an opportunity to fulfill the macrocosm payoff to the Queen Luxia parallels, and give both Allura and the audience the missing context of what happened at the second colony that Keith and Romel were missing. And the season even adds another microcosm parallel to Lotor's situation after being pulled from the Rift in Genesis. In Season 8, Episode 3, The Prisoner's Dilemma, the Paladins attack a Galra-inhabited planet on the assumption that the Galra presence on the planet is inherently hostile and oppressive toward innocent natives like what we'd seen in the past on Alkarion, Puig, and the Balmera. But the episode shows that there are no vulnerable non-Galra civilians being exploited on the planet to begin with. Just a small Galra population trying to keep themselves afloat after Voltron's falling out with Lotor in Season 6 directly led to Galra civilization collapsing into total anarchy. So the leader of the planet, Warlord Lon, who the Paladins used to be on good terms with, is understandably frosty toward our heroes as a result of both their attack on their base and their contributions to the state of Galra civilization in general. Which mirrors how Lotor was furious with the Paladins during their fight in Season 6, and demonstrates even greater fury when he returns in Season 8, ditching his swords and just beating his enemies with his robot's fists. The greater threat of the monster that Krolia unleashed in Season 5 soon forces Lon to put aside his hostility toward Voltron in order to save everyone he still has left. And Season 5, Episode 4, Kral's Era, established that Lotor saw Hagar as the biggest threat to the universe after his father's death, and other episodes have shown us just how much he despises her. So it's easy to believe that once Allura actually gets a chance to talk to him, he'll be willing to put aside any hard feelings over how they parted in Season 6 for the sake of stopping his mother's plans. Especially given that the opening of Clear Day established that the Alteans, who followed his mother because of their loyalty to him specifically, are willing to do the same. And on top of Lotor's storyline, the parallels in Season 8 also indicate that there were bigger plans in store for the monster from The Prisoner's Dilemma as well. Because much like how Lotor's hesitation when he sees Allura in Genesis demonstrates that he's still alive and aware inside his mecha, the creature's behavior in The Prisoner's Dilemma demonstrates that it possesses human or Galra level intelligence. In The Prisoner's Dilemma, we see it demonstrate the ability to communicate with the Paladins in their own language.
What are you?
My name is Keith, the leader of Voltron, Paladin of the Black Lion. Wait, Yordam bearing Exus. Is that you?
Where are the rest of the Galra?
They're still on planet Riker. Why?
Planet Riker.
Operate computers.
Keith, we just contacted Lance and Huck. They saw something. Be advised.
And navigate spacecraft.
What's happening now?
The ship's moving, and it's headed towards Lon's base.
And although the season we got treats it as having been killed when the Paladins blew up the ship it had been living in, watching its last scene in slow motion reveals that it vanishes at the last fraction of a second before the explosions of the self-destruct sequence reach the room it's in. Which storyboard artist Eugene Lee confirmed in an interview with AfterBuzz TV. The episode established that the creature can move so fast that it can go from one side of a hallway to another in less than 1/10 of a second, and that all of the ship's escape pods were still docked and intact. So it's entirely possible for the creature to make it to an escape pod in the 15 full seconds before the ship explodes. And since the creature evidently knew the location of Warlord Lon's base well enough to plot the ship's course toward the planet, it would have most likely continued its journey. Meanwhile, the ending of The Prisoner's Dilemma as presented on Netflix hints that further appearances of Warlord Lon were cut. Because on top of how odd it is for Lon to have such a quick turnaround with regard to trusting the Paladins, he mentions at the end of the episode how
twice the Paladins of Voltron have risked their lives for me, and yet I questioned their intent. I was wrong.
But we've only ever seen that happen once in this very episode, when they helped him against the monster. And the second time the Paladins risked their lives for him cannot be referring to his previous interaction with them in Season 6, Episode 1, Omega Shield, because he didn't question their intent in that episode, and it wasn't just him they were risking their lives for at the time. So clearly, Warlord Lon and the Creature were intended to make a second appearance in the final season before it was edited. And the parallels between the Creature and Lotor, when combined with Lotor's parallels to the Princess from the comics, imply that the Creature's plotline would have been resolved by having the heroes convince it to let go of its hatred toward all Galra. And that since Allura's healing magic would have restored Lotor, it could also potentially reverse the changes the Creature's body underwent as a result of the experiments it was subjected to. But there's also another potential layer to the parallel between Lotor and the Creature if the Creature turns out to actually be Lotor's former General Narti, mutated after he supposedly killed her in Season 4. Because immediately after Lotor attacked her in Season 4, Episode 3, Blacksite, Narti was shown with her arms clearly angled in a way that conveyed that she was lying on her back. Yet barely a minute later in the same episode, we see her seeing eye cat Kova looking down at her body, and she's clearly shown lying on her stomach. Quintessence has previously been shown to have both healing and mutagenic properties in prior seasons, ranging from just bulking up like the Warden of Betatraz in Season 2, to more drastic physical alterations like the creation of the Lizard Robeast in Season 1. And Ranvig's monster displays many abilities similar to Narti.
Shutting down security.
All Galra must perish.
Has the same color palette as her, shares design features like a tail and lack of eyes, and has Galra DNA, as evidenced by its ability to manually access the computers of a Galra warship, which previous seasons established could only be done with Galra technology or Galra genetics. What further supports this is the fact that the scene in Season 8, Episode 2, Shadows, where Unnerva recovers Kova from the wreck of Lotor's ship where Narti supposedly died, features an establishing shot of the shipwreck floating in front of the ruins of planet Dibazal. But not only was Lotor's cruiser not even in that solar system when he abandoned it in Season 4, but everything in the immediate vicinity of Dibazal was obliterated without a trace by the explosion of the Castle of Lions in the Season 6 finale. So for Kova and the cruiser to even still exist for Unnerva to find, they would had to have been somewhere else. And in fact, when the camera zooms in on the cruiser, there's no sign of any planet nearby at all, which indicates that the background was changed at the last minute as part of the executive mandated editing of the season. And there's no reason to make such a last-minute, continuity-breaking change like that if the original background was just going to be the cruiser floating randomly in space. A change like that only makes sense if the location of where the cruiser really ended up was too big of a giveaway that something was cut at the last minute. Like, say, if the cruiser had made it to the edge of the Quantum Abyss, where Keith said the creature was discovered. The creature being Narti turns Lotor's whole story arc from Season 4 to Season 6 into a microcosm of the Paladin's story arc from Season 6 to Season 7. Because what led Keith and Krolia to the Altean colony, ultimately causing the falling out between Voltron and Lotor, was the warlord who experimented on the creature discovering a wrecked cargo ship traveling through the Quantum Abyss. Given the creature's hatred of Galra, the condition it left Warlord Lon's ships in when we encountered it in Season 8, and the absence of the Galra researchers that were involved with the second colony when Keith and Krolia investigate, the details of the series imply that the creature was the one who attacked the cargo shuttle, leading to both the ship and the creature being captured by the Galra warlord Ranvig. So if the creature is really Narti, it would mean that Lotor attacking a close ally started a chain of dominoes that ultimately destroyed much of what he had spent centuries working toward. From the Paladins destroying the Rift Gate to keep him from easily harvesting quintessence from the Rift, to his mother's reaction to him being left there causing Galra civilization to collapse. Which mirrors how Voltron attacking him for the perceived betrayal of hiding the Altean colony and by his own admission of getting Alteans killed in the pursuit of his goals, triggered a chain of dominoes that destroyed much of what they had spent the whole show working toward. Because without a central figure on the Imperial throne, nearly every faction in the Galra Empire went to war with each other over resources and territory, with countless innocent worlds caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, the factions loyal to Lotor's mother were sent on a dedicated campaign to try and wipe out Voltron's allies and invade the Paladins' home planet as bait to lure the heroes in so that Unnerva could destroy them. As you can see, Voltron Legendary Defender uses microcosm to macrocosm storytelling to foreshadow major plot developments consistently enough that we can extrapolate what plot lines were cut from the final season due to World Events Productions meddling. because there are microcosm parallels in prior seasons and even in Season 8 itself that never received the expected macrocosm payoff. But because of how last minute the editing was, the absence of the macrocosm payoff left gaps in the narrative that we can use to figure out what material was cut and construct a surprisingly detailed roadmap of what the story the production crew was making actually looked like. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the end of what I call the tutorial stages of my analysis, so now that I've got these main baselines covered, my next episode will start with full-on analysis of specific plot lines and characters. As usual, if you have any thoughts, observations, or counter-arguments about anything I've said here in today's video, feel free to share in the comments below. And like always, if you want to be notified whenever I upload new videos, be sure to click subscribe, and I'll see you back here again on December 27th for my next video.